Anthropic added the ability for Claude to search the web.
Researchers from Harvard and MIT have launched TxAgent to deliver personalized and trustworthy treatment recommendations.
Nvidia's CEO Jensen Huang opened the company's GTC 2025 conference, AI's Super Bowl.
Gemini erases watermarks. Google's Gemini 2.0 Flash AI model, recently released to developers, just effortlessly can remove those things.
Zoom increased the capabilities of its AI companion, giving it new agentic abilities. Adobe just unveiled the experience platform agent orchestrator. Baidu has launched Ernie 4.5 and Ernie X1. Roblox changing the game development with Cube3D.
State versus federal policymaking for AI.
Google will introduce 2 new powerful features to Gemini: Canvas and audio overviews. Google launched the first satellite in what is to be a 50-satellite constellation to actually take this thing live.
Google and OpenAI have submitted comprehensive policy recommendations aimed at maintaining and enhancing America's leadership in AI.
Welcome back to What the AI, where we decode the latest developments in the world of artificial intelligence. I'm Jeff Keltner.
And I'm Annie Delgado.
Annie, how you doing? How was your week?
It was pretty good, Jeff. How was your week?
Pretty good. Any interesting stories for us?
Let's see. I have a very creative side that I don't get to exercise very often because my job is not, well, I guess it's creative in a different way. Creative in a different way. But so this week, my big creative endeavor was building a leprechaun trap for St. Patrick's Day. Do you guys do these in your house?
We used to. We don't anymore. My kids have passed the point where they want to catch leprechauns. Even if they thought they were real, I don't think they would want to catch them anymore. But did you catch anything in your leprechaun trap?
Well, we didn't really catch anything. I think my child will, much past the appropriate age, continue to want to build leprechaun traps because he also is pretty creative and just likes the thing. But he devised his trap to use gin to lure the leprechaun because I don't think he really understood the whole what you're supposed to use to lure leprechauns. You needed whiskey or something like that.
Whiskey or gold, I think, is the key.
Yeah.
Or gold and whiskey.
So he had a pool of non-alcoholic gin that turned green, and he had a trail of glitter leading out from it that had some footprints in it at the end. So he didn't catch the leprechaun, but leprechaun made it away this time. Leprechaun escaped through the chimney, kind of similar to Santa Claus. But maybe next year.
Then.
He enjoyed the gin. Yeah, there was a straw in the gin at the end of it. So he enjoyed it. So yeah, that was the way it went.
Well, that's successful St. Patrick's Day, I guess. Congratulations. Good work.
Yeah, well, and my family is part of my family Irish heritage. So when I was a kid, there used to be much more robust St. Patrick's Day celebrations. I made carne asada, which I think is not what you're supposed to do, but there you have it.
Carne asada for St. I like it. It's whatever works. You gotta blend.
Close enough
right?
to corned beef. Yeah,
We blend.
that's right.
All right. Well, we'll hop into all the news that's fit to, I guess, not print but say this week. Starting with our AI radar. I had to put this in. Everybody likes to announce things on Thursday, the day before we record, so I have to modify this thing. And yesterday, Anthropic decided it was their turn to drop the last minute, and it added the ability for Claude to search the web, which is like an announcement, but it's very much like okay, we've got it too, because Gemini and ChatGPT and Perplexity, everybody's had this for quite a while, and they've added it. It's been a huge gap, I think, in Claude, the inability to cite sources and search the web for up-to-date information. So now Claude 3.7 Sonnet can do this, but it doesn't feel like it's going to be enough to draw me back, personally, I got to say.
Fair enough. Very much okay, me too. But I guess good to see that they're trying to keep pace with all of the basic functionality that others have.
On the other hand, Nvidia's CEO Jensen Huang opened the company's GTC 2025 conference, referring to it as the AI's Super Bowl, and he had a lot of announcements. Certainly on the cutting edge. Unveiled a bunch of upcoming GPU lines with huge performance increases. Blackwell Ultra for 2025, Vera Rubin for 2026, Feynman, that's my favorite name personally, 2028. So kind of a whole slate of what GPUs are coming down the pipe. And he really talked about it. He's seeing, he said, I think there's more than 100x demand for compute compared to what we thought there would be last year. So he's certainly in the camp of this thing's not slowing down. The super efficient models that keep coming out are not going to delay the demand. And it leaned into a little bit this learning model, thinking model, inference time compute being a part of what's going to drive not just scaling laws of training and huge models to be trained, but also, hey, we're going to get a lot more GPUs for inference time compute.
Yeah. Now you might be my only friend that has a favorite GPU. So why what makes Feynman the favorite? Is it the name or is it something different that you meant?
I mean, Feynman's a, a physicist from Caltech,
Okay.
worked real close to me here, and he was a fascinating teacher who taught physics in a different way. So when I gave up all my books and went to Kindle, the Feynman lectures on physics were the last books I could afford to give up. So anything named after Richard Feynman's gonna grab my attention. So he's just one of my favorites.
Got it. Okay, so we'll be pulling for success for that particular
Yeah, for the Feynman
GPU.
2028 Feynman. They also announced Isaac Groot, a humanoid robot foundation model, and a new robot physics engine called Newton, which was developed, I guess, in conjunction with Google's DeepMind and Disney.
Mm,
Maybe coming soon to Disney World near you, animatronic robots and characters.
yeah.
So a lot of stuff. And the last one, which is really interesting to me, is they renamed a couple months ago. They announced something they called the Newton, like a little small supercomputer targeted at home users, researchers, and they officially unveiled that with a new name, DGX Spark. And you could start reserving yours. So I got in line early, and I've reserved my right to buy a DGX Spark whenever they become available later this year, and then a larger workstation version. So again, but these intended to be for people who don't have data centers and clusters, researchers at universities, individual developers in various companies that don't have access to big clusters to be able to do pretty large scale model training and fine tuning. So a lot of interesting stuff coming out of Nvidia this week. They've got to enjoy having their own conference be considered the Super Bowl of AI, at least self anointed Super Bowl of AI.
Yeah, I was gonna say that, they called it a Super Bowl, but they're clearly the winners. So many things coming out and getting announced all at one time.
Yeah, well, and everybody loves. I saw Jensen was back to his regular leather jacket, not the alligator, which looked a little more classic Jensen to me. So back to the roots for Nvidia, but just constant. The pace of their innovation is kind of mind blowing, and I for a hardware company to have the level and the pace of output that they do is kind of unbelievable and impressive if they can continue to maintain it.
Alright, well, we'll see if they can.
We'll see. Next up, Zoom increased the capabilities of its AI companion, giving it new agentic abilities to complete independent tasks on the platform. They enhanced memory skills, reasoning skills, and now it can do things like handle meeting follow-ups, schedule meetings, has live note taking, catch me up kind of thing when I get into a meeting, and even kind of producing clips for meetings on certain topics and things. So just kind of increasing the capabilities of the AI, something that maybe our listeners are actually going to get to use in the near term because most of us, I think, are still on Zoom. And so a real enhancement to the set of integrated AI capabilities for your Zoom meetings coming soon from Zoom.
I am so excited about this. I started playing around with some of the functionality that was already released last week and told you about it, but I'm really excited to see the continued investment here because there's often this tension in workplaces of like, I go to so many meetings, when am I going to do actual work? And this is actually an opportunity for the meeting to become the actual work, right? The discussion in the meeting is the work product that the human needs to do, and all of the later follow up and build this thing and do this thing and chase down this other answer can be done sort of behind the scenes by an agent. That's pretty amazing in terms of getting higher ROI from the time we spend in meetings. So I'm pretty excited about this myself.
Yeah, I'm really curious if they're going to also get to the point where I can, I use one of these note takers. It's not integrated with Zoom, but I've often wondered, like, can I send it to a meeting I want to know what happened but don't want to go to? Like,
Yeah.
how cool will it be where, the meeting notes become a thing that's so reliable. You go, I don't have to go to that meeting. I just want to know, like, tell me what happened when I'm done and send. And then the Zoom CEOs talk about having a virtual you that can actually participate in a meeting without you being present. I'm not quite sold on that, but being able to listen into a meeting without being present and get the notes later sounds pretty awesome to me, to be honest. So I'll see if they bring that one out soon.
Yeah, I've already had some folks experiment not with sending a virtual version of themselves to a meeting, but just sending somebody else on their team in a divide and conquer sort of approach and then getting the meeting recap afterwards. So I have a number of people who just said, you know what, I just picked five meetings on my calendar that I didn't need to attend, and I was happy to just get the notes afterwards. Whereas previously I would have gone to the meeting for fear that somebody was going to give me incomplete notes, but I actually trust the AI to make sure that I'm getting the complete set of notes at the end versus a human who's trying to sort of participate in the meeting while documented at the same time. So I think people are already getting some value from these things.
Yeah, and for those who have not started using the meeting notes, I do find that to be the most valuable part to me is that I am participating more fully in the meeting because I'm not trying to go, oh, I got to remember that thing. I got to write down an extra. And then you're like behind in the meeting and you haven't been fully present. And so having reliable notes that come to me after where I can just be fully engaged in the discussion. I find that it's very helpful to be really an active participant in all the meetings I'm in as opposed to going, oh, like what I got to write that down. I got to remember that. And that now I'm behind and I'm forgetting. Sorry. That's a really powerful feature. If you can learn to trust the AI, I find whether you, even for the meetings you're at, I find it really helpful, but certainly even better if you don't have to go at
Yeah.
all.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, moving along, Adobe just unveiled an ambitious AI strategy anchored in what they called the Experience Platform Agent Orchestrator. It's
Hmm.
a lot of
Lot of
words. We
words.
got to keep working on this naming thing here in Silicon Valley. I like to just describe it too clearly. But it's got 10 specialized agents designed to streamline complex enterprise tasks like marketing, customer experience, B2B account management. So really, I think trying to two interesting things for me here is the specialized agents that are not just like one LLM to rule them all, but kind of hyper tuned things for specific functions, and then an orchestration layer sitting on top of that. Adobe, of course, has got a lot of the marketing tools, whether it's tag management and website analytics or content creation and ad creation and ad delivery and distribution. So being able to have kind of agents following your workflows and doing the things you want sitting on top of that, I think really interesting and probably very valuable for those who are using the Adobe stack once it gets out there.
Yeah, for sure. I have not used the Adobe Stack in quite a while, but I know there's many out there who still do. So hopefully these tools will be useful.
Good to know that it's out there. And then I feel like this is like every week we have to have somebody making a cheaper model. So this week, Chinese tech giant Baidu stepping into the role is launched Ernie 4.5 and Ernie X1. AI powerful AI models that promise GPT 4.5 level capabilities at just 1% of the price on an API basis. So, I mean, who knows if this is there's lots of questions about the profitability of economic models for Chinese-based companies. Is that just to undercut, the American companies? Are they getting state sponsorship? Can you really do that? But it does just lend more evidence to the sense that the price for a given set of output and compute capability is just going to keep coming down in a nearly unstoppable way. And it feels like every week somebody's coming out with a model that's like pretty much as good as the latest and going to cost you less. And that seems good for people using models, if not for those who are trying to make their money making models.
Yeah, well, and also put some pressure on OpenAI, on Google. How are they going to be thinking about their pricing strategies if there's somebody at 1% of the cost is a pretty stark difference there.
Yeah, and it also reminds me that for most of the developers, if you're not abstracting out the specific model, so that you can go, oh, I want to trade in this model or that model. Let's move over to Baidu's model or Google's model or Anthropic's model. That's a really valuable thing because there's a pretty intense competition between these developers. Just A for capabilities, B for cost. And giving yourself as a developer the flexibility to just trade in and out the models or use a variety of them gives you a lot of leverage and ability to take advantage of either new capabilities or dramatically reduce pricing on the capabilities you have today.
Yeah.
Well, I guess going back towards the creative side of things, Roblox changing the game development landscape with Cube3D, a new open source AI tool that generates fully functional 3D objects and scenes straight out of text prompts. So this was pretty cool. You can do things like generate motorcycle, and it will actually be able to generate 3D mesh objects that you can use in games. I thought this was really cool, and I don't know if you've ever done 3D design, but there's like the creation of the thing, which can take a long time to get the details right. And then the like creation of a scene of multiple things. And it feels like just such a great tool to empower people to build in 3D worlds without kind of like, I don't know how to draw very well. So I can't do those things. But now I can at least draw in 3D somewhat well by just typing generate motorcycle.
Yeah, it's super interesting. I don't play a lot of video games. Honestly, I can't even keep up with trying to play video games with my kids because they'll say, try this. And there's so much information that goes on, it actually literally makes me seasick. So sometimes if I like play too much Minecraft afterwards, I feel like I'm gonna vomit. So I'm a little bit worried about this like potential for 4D, to be even more next level for me. But in terms of just thinking about how different video games are now compared to when we were kids, where there's actually like a very creative element. It used to just be that you were trying to solve the puzzle, and now you're actually like creating the thing as you go, which is fascinating to me. And I can get why it's so entertaining for kids to they get to express their creativity, and now they want a motorcycle in this world, and I want my motorcycle to do this thing, and all this type of stuff is pretty cool.
Yeah, I do love that on Minecraft that the kids are essentially co-creating the game with the developers as they play, and this feels like a Roblox very much works that way as well, and I think this is just a great, you know it's a great tool to unlock, well, I'd say to more broadly distribute the ability to create these kinds of experiences and to unlock what's in your head and be able to, before, again, if you had a great picture in your mind, but you can't draw, you couldn't kind of turn that into reality. And this is just one more way that you can take creative ideas in your head. And if you're not great at 3D design, you can actually go and create 3D worlds, which I think is going to be super cool.
Pretty cool.
All right, last item up in our AI radar section. Google introduced two new powerful features to Gemini, trying to win back the ChatGPT faithful. Um, Two features are one, Canvas, which is the same name as ChatGPT has for the same functionality, which is essentially a real time either document or code editor that you can use in collaboration with Gemini. And the second is audio overviews, which is essentially Notebook LM, at least the audio overview part of Notebook LM brought into the Gemini app. So this was interesting in that it's kind of capabilities they have, at least one they have somewhere else, and one that's already out in the world in Canvas. So super useful features. Canvas is one of my favorite features in ChatGPT. So interesting to see this. And then one other bit, and then we'll talk about this one a little bit because I think it's really interesting. They actually rolled out a new feature to know while they're taking audio overviews and not out of a Notebook LM, but migrating it over into Gemini. They added a live mind map feature into Notebook LM. So if you're generating an audio overview, so you can actually see a map of kind of the content that they generate from the PDF, whatever you upload, and then you can kind of dig into details and find details. And that, as they're taking Notebook LM and maybe folding it into Gemini, this is a new feature only in Notebook LM. So I'm not really sure what the product strategy is from Google on these things, but some interesting developments there.
Yeah, for sure. Again, like, I don't know, same as you, like the product strategy, but I think for human collaboration and for human use, this is so valuable because you have this opportunity now to take something and sort of like multimedia think about it, which I think a lot of times is a barrier for people if they're trying to create something and maybe they're more visual learners than text-based learners. And now this actually, or maybe they, process information better when they listen to it versus when they read it. And now having this ability to have all of the same information but packaged in different ways, people can really interact with it in a way that optimizes for their learning speed, which I think is amazing. I also love, I mean, the big unlock that Gemini has over OpenAI is you can literally just take whatever you've just done in Canvas and say, turn it into a Google Doc for me, and it automatically turns it into a Google Doc. And so much more sort of seamlessly integrated if you're already using G Suite, relative to having to cut and paste, download whatever from ChatGPT. So I think this is going to be a pretty useful tool for myself. I'm excited to use it.
The thing I don't understand about it, and this is to me the challenge Google has in turning models into product, is why is this different? I can already open Gemini inside of a Google Doc to ask it questions, but what it will do for me in the document is so much less capable than what happens if I open the same text in a Canvas in the Gemini app. And that's like a really interesting, like I kind of go, it's cool that I can save the output to a Google Doc, but how come I can't have the same level of sophistication in Gemini, like in a sidebar in my Google Doc? And it's just not quite the same. And it kind of boggles my mind that that's true and what they're doing or how they're thinking about bringing these together. So that's where I talk about it's really interesting. Like if I have a better AI editor in the AI tool than I do in the editor tool, and why aren't those the same or versions of the same or whatever? It'll be really fascinating to see how Google unifies Notebook LM and the Gemini app, or Gemini and Docs and Canvas and Gemini into a coherent place so the user understands what to do and gets the same experience no matter how they enter it. It's fascinating.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think the big difference for me when I think about how I might use Canvas versus the other is that within Canvas, you can generate new content as opposed to asking AI to give you feedback on content you already generated. So like if you can, just put in your notes and your like raw non-pretty thoughts about something, it can generate it into something that's much more polished and professional. And there's a whole debate to have about like it is really important to be able to write well, and I think that's still a skill people need to have, but sometimes you also just need to be able to get your thoughts out quickly and efficiently. And so if it's going to spend you an hour to wordsmith that thing versus using Gemini to just help you, you get your raw thoughts out there and it can help you polish it more quickly, you can make an impact a lot faster. And so that to me is the big difference in the two.
Interesting. Well, I'll be curious to hear as you use them more what you think. And I use ChatGPT a lot for this rundown for this podcast, even though it's in a Google Doc that you and I share. So I will maybe have to try doing it in Canvas and Gemini next time and see how that works for me. And I do to your point, like I've got a lot of notes on a story, and I may go, hey, it knows my rundown format for my instructions. Can you just like format this the way you want and help me figure out which details to include and not? And I don't always agree with it, but it certainly cuts down the time for me to turn an article I read into an item for this podcast. And so I'll have to try it next week, maybe, as opposed to using ChatGPT.
That's funny. I actually almost this morning when I was preparing for the podcast, I had the same thought of like, oh, I'm in here in Google Docs. I should just use Gemini Canvas. And I didn't. And I kept going back to chat. And the reason I kept going back to chat is because it has a project with all the history and it knows my voice and it knows the things that I ask questions about and it has context so even though it's only 19 episodes behind, I feel like Gemini is 19 episodes behind. And so I'm like, I'm nervous about the switchover.
I agree. It'll be the custom instructions, the history. It's a real maybe that is becomes part of the lock-in for a model because my ChatGPT does have a lot of knowledge about this podcast now, and it's much smarter about helping me out because of that. And the Gemini is going to have to catch up.
Yeah.
Well, talking about the length of our podcast, let's hop on to our first story in AI in the wild. This one truly in the wild, but in our second episode of this podcast, so 17 ago or 18, I guess now, we discussed the FireSat program, putting satellites in space to watch for wildfires. And this week, they launched the first satellite in what is to be a 50 satellite constellation to actually take this thing live. So from from concept and models on ground to actual satellites in the sky. Now they have one satellite going up there. This is, I think, very exciting, particularly as a guy who lives in a fire-prone and recently fire-damaged zone. This led by a nonprofit coalition of Earth Fire Alliance and the startup Muon, as well as $13 million from Google Org and a lot of technical support from the Google research team. They're hoping to have 3 satellites through next year and get up to 50 over time. But they say even with the 3 next year, they can check every point on Earth at least twice a day looking for wildfires and obviously focusing on areas where they've got a higher degree of concern or risk. So this is I think, a great example of, AI models in a very non-obvious use case that's pretty cool.
It is pretty amazing. I was reading about this and it said basically like the prior to this functionality, for a satellite to be able to see a fire, the fire had to be roughly 3 acres in size. But this is so much better. It can actually detect something that is a classroom size. So it can see a fire the size of a classroom, whereas before it had to grow to 3 acres. So the speed with which it can identify is just so much better and pretty incredible.
It actually made me think of, and this is a pretty strange connection, but we talked, I think it was last week, about McDonald's using image recognition and AI to check what was going into bags and QA. And it's a similar kind of feel of, hey, we can look at this thing through imagery in a way that humans could never, we would never be able to hire enough people to look at everything going to a bag or to look at a satellite image of every forest on Earth twice a day. Like it would be impractical to hire people to do that, even if you had the satellites flying around. And it's interesting, I think, mental model for one of the things people are using these things for is like we talked about unlimited interns or unlimited entry level employees, but being able to look at a set of data that's too vast to possibly analyze in a more traditional way and go, hey, we can actually now be much faster and accurate about spotting things that are happening. I think is a pretty good mental model for one of the ways these AI tools could be very useful in a lot of different contexts in industries.
Yeah, I think that's right. And, this is maybe a tangent, but so many people are worried about job loss associated with AI and is it going to take people's jobs? And this is an example to me where there's already a lot of people doing this work. The same amount of people will probably still be doing the work. They'll just get a lot more value from the work that they're doing because rather than looking for a needle in a haystack, they have a much more targeted approach. And I think that applies across a number of industries. You mentioned the McDonald's thing, but also any sort of QA related work where you're, monitoring calls, doing QA on files in the, banking industry as an example, or any sort of like compliance related work where you're just checking that somebody didn't make a mistake. And historically, you're just getting a random sample and then, looking for mistakes. And it's a hunt and peck search approach versus using a tool to actually surface the areas of concern. So you're really actually rooting out problems and solving problems. I think it's going to just be like a game changer for those types of fields.
Yeah, the other area I think about a lot that's a similar model is the healthcare space where people are worried about it's going to drive unemployment in healthcare. I say, I don't think our problem is that we have so many doctors that they're sitting around idle. Our problem is that it takes too long for patients to be seen, that doctor visits are too far away, that we can't have enough proactive healthcare. So being able to go and say, hey, let's get more efficacy out of the same number of people. Like, I think a lot of those concerns are quite misplaced because in so many industries, it's not like we're doing too good a job. We're QAing every single phone call. And it just, what are we going to do with these people who are listening to all the phone calls in our call center? Like, that's not happening. Right. And so it's going to just say we can go and take and do the thing we would love to actually be able to do, but can never afford the number of people and be able to actually achieve that realistically with the number of people we have. And I think there's a huge opportunity to increase the level of service and productivity in so many industries with tools like this. So
100%. Well, that's a great segue actually into our next update, which is the Harvard medical model. So, could AI soon become your doctor's most trusted assistant? Researchers from Harvard and MIT have launched TxAgent, an advanced AI agent that combines multi step reasoning and real time biomedical knowledge to deliver personalized and trustworthy treatment recommendations. So this is pretty cool. It's actually exactly the type of use case that you're describing just a moment ago, where an doctor is assisted by an AI agent that can examine sort of the interactions of different drug combinations and potential side effects that a person might experience as a result of that, and deliver a very customized treatment plan for the specific patient, as opposed to sort of a traditional trial and error type of approach where you have to see, let's try this thing, see if we can get the dosage right, see if it works for you, see how you respond, see how we can layer on other things. This sort of AI agent actually can make predictions about what is the actual chemical makeup of the drugs? How are they going to move through the body? What are the clinical effects and side effects for this particular interaction? What are the patient specific details? Like, maybe they have other health conditions. How old are they? What are their sort of genetic makeup? And really just provide a more customized and tailored response. So I think this is going to be, one of those examples where our problem is not that we have too many doctors. Our problem is that we want the doctors being able to sort of work on patient care, and this will be a big step forward in that.
yeah, this was a cool one because we've seen um, so many medical announcements that are around very technical back office is the wrong word, but research, new drug types, finding new proteins and enzymes that have various capabilities. And this is very much like patient centric. How do I get to that actual point of delivery of care and improve what a doctor is able to do and understand and personalize medicine in a way that think is what people kind of imagine from an AI assisted physician. So a little bit more front office patient centric a version of AI and less about the how do we find more research. Not that that's not important, but I think it's interesting to see this at a little bit more at the point of delivery of care, which is a place that I think most of us assume that it will be, but it's a little harder sometimes to see how it's going to play out.
Yeah, and I think there's also a huge opportunity here in terms of uh, this model is not sort of talking about that, but I think in general, there's an opportunity to use AI to give better information and education to the patient to participate in that their own conversation. How many times do you hear a advertisement for some sort of drug and it sounds like a wonder drug, and then at the end it lists all the possible side effects, and of course they're required to list all those possible side effects because it's a regulatory requirement that they do so. But if you are a patient who's thinking about using that thing and you're trying to evaluate the trade-offs of the value you might get from the treatment versus the potential side effects, and you had an agent for yourself that was saying the likelihood that you would experience that based on all these other factors and so on and so forth, that would be amazing in terms of informing decision making and helping you be more involved in your own sort of treatment plan as well. So I really like it for that sort of opportunity.
We'll put this out there as a product request. I mean, I have a project in ChatGPT that is a bunch of my medical history, and blood test results and that kind of stuff. And I ask it questions before I'm going to see a doctor about it. And it understands me as well. I look at this and that and the other. And I think it'll be really fascinating if you did have a how to be a better patient advocate for yourself, AI that understood where your blood tests are at, what medications you're on, what supplements you take, what your health concerns are, history, family things, and then could help you be much better at navigating the information that's available to you as a patient and better advocate for yourself in the healthcare system. I mean, doctors are amazing and they're very helpful in doing their best, but it's also very true that to get the best outcomes, you need to be a strong advocate for yourself and a well-informed advocate as a patient. And so I'd love to see the purpose-built medical AI that can pull in all my information and history and then help me make choices or understand or evaluate different treatments or just lifestyle changes I might want to make and like how effective might that be for me. So if anybody's building that, let me know because I will be an early beta tester. But until then, ChatGPT project with all of my medical records uploaded, it will be.
There you go. Product ideas and requests from Jeff. I think I like that one too.
Make that a new segment of the show.
That's right. Well, let's move on to our AI alignment section. So, first story I have for you, also from Gemini, is Gemini erases watermarks. So, if a watermark is erased without a trace, was it ever really there? So you know what I'm talking about. You know, you find a image on the internet and has a watermark against it, so that you know that it belongs to somebody else or that it's copyrighted. You have to pay to use it and so on and so forth. Well, Google's Gemini 2.0 Flash AI model recently released to developers just effortlessly can remove those things, right? So they can just take them off the images and then they can fill in the gaps so that it looks like the watermark was never really there. And this is very much a difference from, Claude 3.7 and OpenAI's GPT 4.0, where they have protections against this type of misuse. Gemini actually launched this model without the protections. So, of course, legal experts weighing in, highlighting that removal of these watermarks is illegal
They
under
can't, not
United
supposed to do
States.
that.
Yep, not supposed to do it. So it's illegal under US copyright law. Outside, very limited exceptions. So we'll see how they're going to respond to that. But I think this was a good practical example of some of the stuff we've talked about recently in terms of investments in safety protocols and the investments you put pre-launch of a model to make sure that you are not putting something out in the wild that's going to have unintended consequences, inadvertently get you in trouble. And I think, this could get Google in a lawsuit. I think they have the money to cover it, but a lot of people not happy about what they're saying here.
Yeah, this one was fascinating to me because it is that Google didn't see this coming and have a little bit more preparation on the safety side, but B, this real question that I think is at the core of a lot of the regulatory questions about how do we want to handle AI, which is like, where does the liability fall? I mean, you can do some of this stuff with manual effort in Photoshop, but we don't really go, well, you sue Photoshop because somebody used Photoshop to remove a watermark from a Getty image they didn't pay for. You go, well, that person should be sued for violating the copyright and publishing the image and whatever. And so this question of does the nature of AI and the way the tool works shift where that liability should sit, but from the end user who used the tool to do the thing that's wrong to the maker of the tool, who did the thing, who made it possible, or at least so easy it was almost trivial, the thing that was wrong. This is I think there's lots of examples that fall on your intuition will fall on different sides. This one feels a little more counter to my normal side. Like Google owes some responsibility here because it's just so easy to do. It's almost like a button. But I don't know. What do you think? Do you have a perspective on like where you think that liability sits and how this is, if not, it's illustrative for us on like the concept of where does liability and responsibility sit for these violations that are somewhere between the model and the model builder and the actual user who's using it for the thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really hard question, and I think that it's so complex that you're gonna just like with yourself, you're gonna have different answers for different use cases. I think, like, my problem in this situation is basically, like, if you make it so easy that it stops feeling illegal, you're gonna normalize it, right? And so the end users, do we actually have the power to educate the millions of Americans on United States copyright law? Probably not, right? Like, that's not gonna be something that's realistic or feasible, but Google can make it easy not to trip up this, like, low-hanging fruit for an end user, right? And so I think that's the thing for me is, like, if you just make it so easy that people stop realizing that it even matters, then the company's gone too far and needs to put some sort of safety protocols in there.
Then again, I could always argue that the real commercial uses of such images after the watermark is removed is, if Jeff does it for an internal presentation and puts it in a slide deck, who cares? Is that really worth fighting and stopping innovation over? And if somebody's putting it in a movie or, something with actual real commercial value, well, it's easy to find it and then sue them and see what the actual damage is in terms of licensing. And they've got a real incentive to not. So there is this kind of counter tension, which is like, I know lots of people who half their internal presentations have watermarks right over them. And is the world really any better or worse if we can remove the watermarks from my internal presentations of the girl with the fire behind her kind of thing that's everybody loves for their meme images and presentations. So I don't know. It will be interesting to see how this plays out because there is real tension on both sides and good arguments to be made on where that responsibility ought to sit and what the economic damage is on whichever side you choose, right? Like the damage to the innovation of the AI models, and do we fall behind others because we're cobbling them to prevent this, and the damage of, hey, these people spend a lot of money to produce this content. Like, are we going to damage the economic value of it by making it trivial to copy in illegal ways?
Yeah, well, it's an interesting debate. We'll see how it plays out, and Google will be an early test case. Speaking of debates, one of my favorite topics we're going to transition to, which is state versus federal policymaking for AI. So we're first going to talk about state, then we'll move to federal. So California has released a draft report of its joint policy working group for AI frontier models. What very long, also lots of words, many words, but basically what's been done in the state of California is they brought together sort of a cross-functional team, which I like about the team. They have AI experts in there, they have legal experts, they have policy experts, and they brought together this group to put together sort of a framework that California might use in shaping its AI policy. There is a lot to love in the framework and maybe some things not to love. So I'll start with my um, favorite feature of this is the sort of focus on evidence-based policymaking. So some of the criticisms that I've had in the past on AI bills that we've seen introduced is that they go too far because they're not rooted in anything that's like an actual real risk that's here today, and there's no evidence to support that it's anywhere in the near term. So this really leans into evidence-based policymaking and really shifting the criterion for how we think about what to regulate to be based on data and hard scientific facts, which I think is really great. What's not to love about it, in my opinion, is again, it's another law introduced at the state level as opposed to a bigger holistic thing. So we'll get to that in a second. But you have any feelings about this policy working group?
Well, first of all, it's just I really greatly appreciate the California government proving that it's not just AI companies that suck at naming things. The name of this, the what is it? The draft report of the Joint California Policy Working Group on AI Frontier Models. Like, I mean, good lord.
Good Lord.
I agreed with your take that I like the evidence base. There was another set of sections in this that were kind of reasoning from analogy and going back to tobacco companies hiding information about health impacts, energy companies hiding information about climate change, even back to the early days of the internet and some of the choices made around security. And I felt like the tobacco and energy things were a bit unfair in terms of those were really people who had substantial knowledge of real world harms that they were hiding. And there's no evidence that that's analogous to what's happening in the space today. And I thought the internet comparison was interesting that, we made choices that have limited our security, opened up a lot of the security issues. They don't talk about the question of if we had been there making regulations tightly on the internet in the early days, would we? I mean, the internet's kind of a success story. And it's not clear that it would have been as big a success story if the government was in there going, make sure we get the security stuff right. Don't allow these cyber attacks. And they kind of gloss over yeah, 20 years after we didn't do regulations, we know what we should have done better. But that doesn't mean that 20 years ago, you could have done a better thing and made the right choices to not prevent the level of innovation and economic growth that has been driven by the internet. So those reasoning from analogy sections were a little dangerous to me because they kind of go to these kind of runs counter to the evidence-based policy and hey, these are things that kind of look like maybe like the energy guys 40 years ago, and like some bad stuff happened. Maybe it could here too. And those made me a little nervous that they could go down the path of really being overly ambitious in their regulation in ways that they thought were analogous to something, but really were not and could be overly onerous in my take.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think it is very important and valuable to learn lessons from the past, but it's equally important and valuable to think critically about how much those lessons actually apply to whatever you're doing today so that you take the parts of the lessons that are useful and valuable and something that you want to carry forward versus the things that were true for a specific moment in time in a specific set of circumstances. And so I do think that that is the tough balance to strike, that we're gonna sort of see. This is just a draft, as you mentioned, so they're requesting public comment, and then they expect the final thing to be out in June. So we'll see where they land. But I agree with you that that is sort of a risk that they face. The other thing that is a risk in this that I feel somewhat nervous about is they leaned in heavily to one of the requirements that they think is really important is independent evaluation. And that sounds great in theory, right? When you think about like our financial system and how we have independent auditors that check that no one's cooking the books, that's working pretty well. Like that's useful. It's really great to have a second set of eyes. It is hard for me to imagine who is the independent body at this moment in time that can set one framework by which all of these different foundation models are going to be evaluated, because there's a limited supply of people who are truly experts in this field. There is a vast amount of use cases and data being used, and so the risks are very different. And then, how you sort of set up what that would even look like feels very challenging to me. So if we are going to start with, hey, before real innovation gets unlocked, we need to have the audit protocol, that feels far-fetched to me.
A little cart before the horse,
Yeah.
maybe. Yeah.
Yeah,
I
and
think
then
they're
you're gonna have an audit protocol that dictates the innovation as opposed to innovation and then figuring out how to audit it as you
how to
go.
audit it. Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree. And but this is just a draft report of a working group report, which is like advice to the governor on things we may want to do. So it's not even a draft of a law, it's a draft of a policy recommendation report. So lots of chances for this to kind of move along the way. But I do, it's always interesting to see the government. I read a great piece by Noah Smith. He's kind of going, sometimes the best thing for the government to do is nothing, and to recognize that private entities are driving innovation, and what you got to do is just not get in the way. And I think it's very hard. Policymakers see a thing that's happening that's a big deal in the world. And they want to like participate in some way. And sometimes it's tough to go. The best way for you to participate now is as a spectator, right? And wait until there's a thing for you to really do. And that doesn't feel very rewarding, but sometimes in our American society, it is the right path.
Well, it may be the right path, but it sounds like Sam Altman might disagree with you. So let's transition to our next section, which is the responses that both Google and OpenAI have sent to the White House calling for an AI action plan. So this is in response to the United States government's initiative to develop an action plan. Both Google and OpenAI, as I mentioned, have submitted comprehensive policy recommendations aimed at maintaining and enhancing America's leadership in AI. Their proposals focus on investments, regulatory frameworks, infrastructure development, and international collaboration. So, some really interesting stuff coming out of both of these things, but they seem to very clearly think that there is a need for government to get involved. Specifically, they share my concern about a state level patchwork being the sort of driving force as opposed to a federal level set of guidelines. And so I think that there's pretty strong indication from both of these letters that it's important for the federal government to step in with something that is a little bit more sweeping and applies everywhere, as opposed to having to deal with a bunch of different states with different nuances and different various degrees of understanding and all of that. Both talk a lot about copyright data, which is actually super fascinating. I want to spend a few minutes just sort of going down a rabbit hole on that. So basically, they have argued that the data used to train their models, even though it is copyrighted data, it should be sort of fair use because of the transformative nature of how their models work. So, of course, content creators and creative types, Hollywood types, et cetera, are very up in arms and about this and feel like they are owed licensing fees for all of their content, which of course they are under the current law. The sort of counter argument from the AI developers is that, hey, your content is not just replicated and given to somebody, it's used to train a model that then generates something completely different from how the content started and may not even be recognizable. So, how are we even going to think through about when you're owed a licensing or royalty fee from that content versus not is a very complex question. And so OpenAI and Google are asking the federal government to weigh in on that and to make some very clear guidelines about it.
And Hollywood, objected. So there was this open letter from Ben Stiller, Mark Ruffalo, Kate Blanchett, Paul McCartney, Aubrey Plaza, who I know is one of the actresses you like. I found this letter to be there's a really interesting debate here, and they have the ability to weigh in reasonably. But I found the letter to be kind of outrageous. Like they described the AI companies as quote rewriting the established law in favor of so-called fair use. And I was like, fair use is a pretty established precedent. It's not so-called fair use is not really. It felt like they were trying to kind of ignore the history of real copyright law in this. Well, I agree though. There's a really interesting question of like, how do we sustain creative works and creators in this world? And does an AI reading this was also happened a lot in the Google Books, right? Where Google said, hey, if we copy the book, like literally make a digital copy of a book, is that, but we never publish it. We use it to, make search available, whatever. Like, is that illegal? And that's a lot the same question here is that these AI companies are clearly making copies, digital copies, private copies of these works in order to have it in their set of training data. Is that illegal? And then is the output that is generated as and their argument will be, hey, just like an author who reads hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of books, thousands of books, and then like takes things from Hemingway and takes things from Shakespeare and kind of remelds that, informs and influences their output. Like, isn't that what this model is doing? And if people are allowed to read all these books and then write things that are inspired by them, aren't our models? Like, it's a tough debate, but it does, the AI does change the scale of the output capable from what a human who reads all those books are. And it may be a small difference, but it may make a big difference in the end where it really changes how we have to think about this.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. It's a very complex question, and I think people who create creative content, they need to get paid for their content. I think it's also recognized that the value that we're gonna get as a society from generative AI is made more valuable by more content and more data feeding it, and so sort of both sides have to get solved for in some way, and I'm not quite sure how that's gonna happen, but, it is very clear that Google and OpenAI are asking the government to help with that debate and help sort of come up with a plan here. So we'll see what they come up with.
They want a firm answer at least on is the major thing we're doing illegal or not, and what is the regime under which we should think about it, because it's totally unclear now.
Yep. So the other things that they would like some guidance and help from the government on, first of all, is improvements in infrastructure. So there's a clear demand in these letters that we need more infrastructure, we need more data centers, we need more investment in sustainable energy. We talked about energy a lot last week, but we need investment in sustainable energy so that we can actually build data centers that are affordable for us and can keep our competitive edge with the sort of global AI race that we're in with China and others. And so there's a request there. And then lastly, on export controls, and this is another really tricky balancing act that we need to solve for, which is that the spirit of these letters and the spirit of the uh, things that we've heard from the current administration is that we really want to be AI leaders in the United States. We want to be at the forefront of this AI race. In order to do that, we also by necessary have to be sort of, frenemies with the other participants in the race. We got to share some information, share some technology at the same time. So, how do we strike that balance of being able to unlock that innovation and the sort of benefits that you get from the sharing of ideas while still maintaining a competitive edge in the race is a very hard balance. And there's some controls around imports and exports that need to happen for us to be able to do that well.
That was a really fascinating section to me, and the difference between the two, Google and OpenAI, in this was interesting because throughout OpenAI's letter, there was this kind of like anti-China, like competitive with DeepSeek, and they lean to democratic AI, kind of the sense that imbuing Western, particularly democratic values into these systems was critical for the future. Google really I don't think they mentioned China or DeepSeek by name at all, but it was kind of an undertone to everything in the OpenAI letter, which I thought was really fascinating, that they kind of were setting it up as a clash of cultures, clash of nations, and like, are we going to invest in being the winners of this newest AI war with China? And not just the technologies, but the values imbued in the technologies, and which one of those gets distributed throughout the world. That was a really interesting difference between the two takes from these two companies that went out on these letters.
Yeah. So for listeners, they are fascinating reads. I definitely recommend that people pick them up and listen to them if you're looking for, or if you don't want to, if you don't want to read them, throw them in Notebook LM, generate a podcast, listen to it on your Saturday morning run. That's my weekend advice. But lots of interesting developments this week, and we'll see how it all shakes out and whether the administration responds and picks up the pen and sort of tries to solve these issues, or whether it's not on their agenda and we're left to the states.
It's hard to tell with this administration what they're going to pick up the pen and run with. So, a lot of pens that they're using, but I don't know if this will be one. But it will be interesting to see, and lots of really fascinating questions that we probably will learn a lot more about as people make their first attempts at these things.
Great. Well, good to see you, Jeff. I'll see you next week.
We will see you next week, Annie.
Bye.
Ready to expand your AI knowledge? Want to become the go-to AI expert in your organization? Take the next step with Upstart's AI certification for financial services. This comprehensive course simplifies the fundamentals of artificial intelligence for financial services professionals. Both the course and this podcast are brought to you by Upstart, whose leading AI lending marketplace connects millions of consumers to banks and credit unions that leverage Upstart's AI technology to deliver superior credit products, from personal loans to auto loans to home equity lines of credit. If you learned something useful this week, hit subscribe on YouTube or leave us a rating on iTunes or Spotify. Your support can help others discover What the AI. And finally, share your biggest AI questions and insights with us at email@whattheai.fm. We really do read every message, and we do our best to cover them all on the show.